What if some of the most visionary science fiction films of the 1960s were lost not because they failed, but because they scared the studios that made them? Imagine cinematic experiments buried under the rise of television and space race propaganda. These are stories of genius ignored, of innovation silenced. Join us as we uncover 15 overlooked 60s sci-fi classics you have probably never streamed, but still remain incredible today. Number 15. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. Released during the Cold War's most feverish years, this British gem was both prophetic and ignored. The Day the Earth Caught Fire tells of two nuclear tests that knock Earth off its axis, heating the planet toward destruction. Shot in moody black and white with an orange tint for the final scenes, it captured the paranoia of global annihilation with chilling realism. The film's audacious political stance terrified its distributors. It directly blamed superpowers for environmental collapse decades before the word climate change existed. Newspapers called it unpatriotic. American theaters refused to book it, fearing backlash over its anti-nuclear message. Behind the scenes, journalist-turned-director Val Guest fought constant budget cuts and censorship demands to remove references to government incompetence. Even with those compromises, the film's ending offered no comfort, only the possibility of extinction. Though largely forgotten amid flashier American sci-fi, it resurfaced in later decades as critics hailed it as one of the first eco-apocalypses on film. Watching it now feels like reading tomorrow's headlines. Its vision of fire sky and human arrogance remains a warning too eerily familiar to ignore. Number 14. Robinson Crusoe on Mars, 1964. This film should have been a blockbuster. It had a strong concept, a respected director, and the promise of realistic science fiction years before 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yet Robinson Crusoe on Mars became one of the decade's great forgotten experiments. The plot is as simple as its title. After a spacecraft mishap, an astronaut crashes on the Martian surface and must survive with limited oxygen, food, and sanity. The film transforms Daniel Defoe's survival tale into a meditative struggle for existence on a hostile red world. It was daringly quiet, reflective, and visually stunning. The desolate Utah landscape stood in for Mars long before digital effects. But audiences in 1964 wanted monster invasions and space battles, not introspection. Critics dismissed it as dull, and sponsors complained it lacked excitement for kids. Behind the curtain, director Byron Haskin fought constant interference from executives demanding a robot sidekick or alien war sequence. He refused, and the studio buried its release with minimal promotion. For years, it lived in late-night TV obscurity until modern critics praised it for scientific realism and emotional depth. Today, Robinson Crusoe on Mars feels like the bridge between pulpy adventure and thoughtful science fiction. Its silence, its loneliness, its awe at the universe's indifference make it hauntingly timeless. Number 13. The First Men in the Moon, 1964. This imaginative adaptation of H.G. Wells's novel was a blend of adventure, wonder, and satire, but it vanished under the shadow of bigger space films. Produced by the legendary Ray Harryhausen, it used groundbreaking stop-motion effects to bring lunar life to the screen with astonishing texture and imagination. The film follows a Victorian scientist who invents anti-gravity paint and journeys to the moon, discovering a civilization of insect-like creatures called selenites. What began as whimsy turns sinister as the explorers confront alien logic far beyond human morality. Audiences expected spectacle, but got something stranger. The film's mock newsreel framing and critique of imperialism confused viewers and critics. American censors trimmed scenes suggesting humanity's greed might doom alien worlds as well. Harryhausen's effects work was extraordinary, yet Columbia Pictures refused to spend on marketing, believing it too intellectual for children and too childish for adults. The result was a commercial disappointment. Decades later, it was rediscovered as one of Harryhausen's most mature efforts, a film that dared to mix whimsy with warning. It imagined space exploration not as conquest, but as a mirror, showing our own arrogance back to us. Watching it today is like opening a time capsule from an era when dreams of space still held fear in their heart. Number 12. The Power, 1968. By the late 60s, audiences were fascinated by psychic powers, mind control, and hidden experiments. The Power took that paranoia and turned it into a sleek nightmare. Directed by Byron Haskin, who had also made Robinson Crusoe on Mars, this MGM thriller combined mystery, horror, and science fiction in a way few had attempted. The story begins when scientists at a secret research facility discover that one of their own possesses extraordinary mental powers capable of killing without touch. As suspicion spreads, paranoia consumes the team. Each death seems impossible, and the survivors realize the killer can control thought itself. George Hamilton plays the rational physicist, while Suzanne Plachette delivers a performance filled with quiet fear and doomed curiosity. Behind the camera, production was turbulent. Studio executives could not decide if they wanted a horror film or a cerebral thriller. Budget cuts forced reused sets from other MGM productions, and the marketing department had no idea how to sell a film about telekinesis before it became fashionable. Early reviews called it confusing, yet its tone of invisible dread predicted later hits like Scanners and Firestarter. Censors objected to scenes depicting human experimentation, echoing real-life anxieties about government mind control programs rumored. In that era, some territories trimmed those moments, reducing the narrative coherence even further. But among cult fans, The Power became legendary for its final act, where reality folds under psychic pressure, and the score by Miklos Rosa builds to overwhelming tension. Rediscovered by critics decades later, The Power now stands as an eerie reflection of Cold War fears and scientific hubris. It warns that the most dangerous weapons are not nuclear, but human minds left unchecked. Number 11. Quatermass and the Pit, 1967. At the rise of the space-age dreams and beneath the busy London streets, this British science fiction horror narrative quietly laid out one of the decade's most unsettling visions. Construction workers tunneling for an extension on the London Underground uncover what appears at first to be a bomb, but the discovery turns out to be something far older and far more terrifying. A Martian spacecraft and the fossilized remains of insect-like beings who seeded early humanity. Directed by Roy Ward Baker and based on the television serial by Nigel Neal, the film blends archaeological unease, alien science, and psychic disturbance into a chilling tale of cosmic inheritance. At the time, audiences were unprepared for its mix of horror and speculative philosophy. The notion that humanity's violent impulses might be implanted Martian programming disturbed the status quo. Many critics found it too intellectual for the mass market. Today, the film stands as a quietly radical work. Its art house aesthetic, haunting usage of sound and shadow, and bleak view of human identity resonate still. Its legacy lives in later, more overt space thrillers, yet it remains underwatched by many. Watching Quatermass and the Pit now is like uncovering a secret beneath the rails, unexpected, cold, and deeply disquieting. Number 10. Planet of the Vampires, 1965. Before Alien terrified audiences, there was Planet of the Vampires. Directed by Italian master Mario Bava, this low-budget production combined hypnotic visuals, gothic atmosphere, and cosmic dread long before space horror became a genre. The story follows two rescue ships responding to a distress signal from an uncharted planet. Once landed, the crew members begin turning on each other, possessed by unseen alien forces that feed on the living. The sets glow with eerie color filters, blue mist-red skies, and endless darkness, giving the film a dreamlike unreality. Critics at the time did not know what to make of it. The dialogue felt stilted due to multilingual shooting, and the American distributors re-edited the film, removing much of Bava's pacing. Yet, beneath those flaws lay pure visionary filmmaking. The designs of derelict alien ships and skeletal remains directly inspired later Hollywood classics, though credit was rarely given. Behind the scenes, the production was grueling. Filmed entirely on cramped sound stages in Rome, the crew endured blistering heat from intense lighting that created the planet's glow. Actors fainted inside their rubber suits. Bava improvised special effects with mirror smoke and colored gels, stretching a tiny budget into haunting grandeur. Censors in some regions banned it for its imagery of corpses reanimating and crewmates turning cannibalistic. To the moral boards, it was too grim for science fiction, too morbid for art. But over time, Planet of the Vampires became a cult beacon. Its influence can be traced through Ridley Scott's Alien and countless modern space horrors. Watching it now feels like stepping into a nightmare painted with light. It whispers that the real terror in space is not what we meet out there, but what we bring with us. Number 9. The Andromeda Strain, 1969. Long before high-tech pandemic thrillers became fashionable, the Andromeda Strain imagined a microscopic apocalypse that felt disturbingly real. Adapted from Michael Crichton's debut novel, this film presented science fiction without monsters or lasers, only cold, sterile terror. The story begins when a satellite crashes into a small desert town and everyone there dies almost instantly. A group of scientists is rushed to a secret underground facility known as Wildfire to investigate. What they uncover is horrifying. A deadly extraterrestrial microorganism capable of mutating faster than they can study it. As containment protocols fail and the facility's systems spiral out of control, the tension becomes unbearable. What made this film extraordinary was its devotion to realism. Every corridor, every control room felt authentic. The producers hired NASA consultants to ensure the technology looked plausible, but that precision came at a cost. Filming in elaborate multi-level sets pushed the schedule over budget and exhausted the cast, who spent days locked in sealed mock laboratories under blinding white lights. At the time, critics didn't know how to categorize it. It lacked the spectacle of Star Wars-style adventure or the gothic thrills of earlier sci-fi. Some called it too clinical, too intellectual. Others praised it as visionary and terrifying in its restraint. Certain nations hesitated to screen it publicly, fearing panic amid growing concerns about biological warfare. Television broadcasts in Europe were delayed for years. Yet decades later, its influence could be seen in everything from Contagion to 28 Days Later. The Andromeda Strain stands as a haunting reminder that humanity's greatest enemy may not roar or invade. It may simply evolve in silence while we watch helplessly through glass. Number 8. Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, 1969. A British-American co-production from Jerry and Sylvia Anderson, the creators behind Thunderbirds, this was a film that dared to visualize the impossible. Journey to the Far Side of the Sun was about discovery and deception, two sides of the same coin. The premise is stunning in its simplicity. Scientists detect a mysterious planet hidden on the exact opposite side of Earth's orbit, always invisible because it mirrors our position around the sun. A manned mission is launched to explore it, but when the astronauts arrive, they crash and awaken to what seems to be Earth itself. Gradually, they realize the horrifying truth. They are on a mirror version of Earth where everything, including writing and time, runs backward. It was an audacious concept for 1969. The sets were magnificent, with futuristic spacecrafts and sleek control rooms that rivaled Hollywood productions. Yet the film failed commercially. Critics dismissed it as confusing and slow. Some theaters even refused to show it after test audiences complained the ending made them uncomfortable. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. The Andersons' marriage was collapsing during production, and tension spilled onto the set. The film's cinematographer insisted on experimental mirror techniques that drove costs higher, while the studio slashed marketing funds, fearing the plot would alienate audiences. But time has been kind to this strange mirror world odyssey. Modern viewers recognize its philosophical depth, a film that asks what reality means when perception itself can lie. Its haunting imagery inspired later films like Moon and Solaris. Journey to the Far Side of the Sun feels like an echo from another dimension, a message that our reflection might not love us back. Number 7. The Time Travelers, 1964. When cheap time travel films flooded drive-ins, few expected one of them to hold up as a visionary masterpiece. Yet, The Time Travelers, directed by Ib Melchior, did just that. The story begins innocently enough. A team of scientists tests a time-viewing portal meant to observe history without entering it. But the machine malfunctions and hurls them centuries into the future. There, they find Earth devastated by nuclear war and populated by mutant survivors hiding underground from the irradiated wasteland above. Despite its tiny budget, the film achieved remarkable atmosphere through ingenuity. Melchior shot with minimal sets, using looping corridors and clever camera tricks to create an endless futuristic city. The eerie silence, the flickering lights, and the hopelessness of humanity's survivors gave the film a haunting realism, absent from bigger studio productions. Censors objected to its bleak ending, where the scientists trapped in time realize they have become part of an infinite loop doomed to repeat their journey forever. The studio considered it too nihilistic and demanded an alternate ending. Melchior refused, so the film was quietly released with little advertising. Over time, the time travelers gained cult reverence. Its cyclical finale predated the mind-bending twists of films like The Matrix and 12 Monkeys. Many scholars now view it as a hidden gem of philosophical science fiction, one that traded spectacle for haunting existential dread. In an age obsessed with forward motion, the time travelers dared to say progress might be a trap, and time itself our cruelest invention. Number 6. Seconds, 1966. There are films that entertain, and there are films that disturb you so deeply you cannot shake them. Seconds belongs to the latter. Directed by John Frankenheimer, this psychological science fiction nightmare told the story of a man who gets a second chance at life only to realize that freedom itself can become a prison. The plot follows Arthur Hamilton, a middle-aged banker suffocating in suburban monotony. Through a mysterious organization called the Company, he fakes his death, undergoes experimental surgery, and emerges as a younger man played by Rock Hudson. With a new face, a new identity, and a life built from lies, he tries to rediscover joy. But soon he learns that perfection comes at a horrifying price. At its release, audiences were not ready. The film's grim tone and fractured editing were revolutionary, but deeply unsettling. The studio had expected a sleek thriller. Instead, Frankenheimer delivered existential horror. The Cannes Film Festival audience booed during its premiere, and Rock Hudson was so shaken by the critical response, he left the theater in tears. Behind the scenes, the production was grueling. Cinematographer James Wong Howe shot scenes using wide-angle lenses and infrared film to distort faces and lighting, creating a nightmarish realism. The surgery sequence, featuring real medical footage, horrified censors forcing multiple edits. Television broadcasts later cut entire scenes deemed too grotesque. For decades, Seconds was misunderstood, dismissed as a failure. But modern critics revere it as one of the bleakest masterpieces of the 60s, a film about identity conformity and the illusion of choice. It whispers an unsettling truth that rebirth without purpose is just another form of death. Number 5. The 10th Victim, 1965. Long before dystopian death games became fashionable, there was The 10th Victim, an Italian futuristic satire that predicted the entire reality television craze decades in advance. Directed by Elio Petri, this colorful, violent, and absurd masterpiece imagined a world where murder was entertainment and survival was celebrity. The story unfolds in a near future where war has been replaced by a global game called The Big Hunt. Contestants alternate as hunter and victim broadcast live to thrill-seeking audiences. Marcello Mastroianni plays a jaded veteran of the sport, while Ursula Andress plays his glamorous rival who plans to kill him during a commercial shoot. What begins as deadly competition becomes a surreal love story drenched in irony and neon. Upon release, the film scandalized audiences. Its mix of violence, humor, and sensuality confused critics. The Vatican condemned it as moral decay. American distributors trimmed several scenes, including its biting critique of consumerism and televised death. The production design, featuring futuristic architecture of Rome, was mocked at the time, but would later influence the aesthetics of The Hunger Games and The Running Man. Behind the curtain, Elio Petri clashed with producers over tone. He wanted political satire. They wanted pulp entertainment. The result was both, a wild cinematic paradox that aged like prophecy. For years, The 10th Victim was nearly impossible to find, except in censored versions. But restoration efforts revived it, revealing its astonishing prescience. Today, it feels more real than ever, a glittering mirror showing how easily humanity trades morality for spectacle. Number 4. The Damned, 1963. Also known as These Are the Damned, this British film from Hammer Studios began as a rebellious biker drama but transformed into one of the most haunting science fiction allegories of its time. Directed by Joseph Losey, who had been blacklisted in Hollywood, the film carried his trademark cynicism and despair. It opens with a British tourist who befriends a violent youth gang led by a sociopathic leader. When they flee the authorities, they stumble upon a secret government facility on the cliffs of Dorset. Inside, they discover a group of children living in isolation, cold to the touch and glowing with radiation. The horrifying truth emerges. These children were genetically engineered to survive a future nuclear holocaust. The film's production was turbulent. Lucy fought studio executives who wanted action and romance instead of philosophical dread. Censors demanded cuts to dialogue that criticized government secrecy. The result was a butchered release schedule that left the movie shelved for 2 years. By the time it finally reached theaters in 1965, it was barely noticed. Critics who did see it called it too dark, too political, too strange. But its themes of youth exploitation and government hypocrisy gave it eerie relevance as the Cold War intensified. Decades later, The Damned earned recognition as one of Hammer's most daring works, far removed from gothic horror, yet just as chilling. It predicted environmental decay, nuclear anxiety, and moral collapse with poetic precision. Watching it today feels like staring into the future's shadow where innocence becomes a weapon, and humanity's saviors are prisoners of its fear. Number 3. The Incredible Shrinking Man, 1957, but rediscovered in the 60s. Though technically released at the tail end of the 50s, The Incredible Shrinking Man gained its cult reputation throughout the 60s when television reruns revealed its strange, tragic power. Directed by Jack Arnold, it began as pulp science fiction and ended as one of the most profound philosophical meditations ever filmed. The story follows Scott Carey, an ordinary man exposed to a mysterious radioactive mist while vacationing. Gradually, he begins to shrink, losing inches each day until his world becomes a hostile landscape of cat's needles and basement floods. What starts as a horror of physical transformation turns into a journey of spiritual transcendence. The smaller he becomes, the larger his consciousness grows. Censors at the time feared its religious overtones and scenes showing Carey's deteriorating body. Some foreign distributors even refused to release it, claiming audiences would find it too depressing. Yet it endured precisely because it defied easy genre labels. By the 60s, it had found new meaning. In an age obsessed with nuclear power and man's insignificance in the universe, The Incredible Shrinking Man felt prophetic. Its closing monologue, where Carey accepts his fate and declares himself infinite despite his vanishing size, resonated with a generation facing both atomic dread and cosmic wonder. Behind the scenes, production was an endurance test. Actor Grant Williams performed against massive props, while crew members manually controlled giant spiders built from puppets and forced perspective. The effects remain astonishing even today. Modern critics now call it one of the most poetic science fiction films ever made. It reminds us that identity and scale mean nothing against the vastness of existence. In losing himself, Carey becomes eternal. Number 2. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976, but conceived in the 60s. Before David Bowie ever stepped into the role, this haunting vision was born from a 60s concept that terrified studios. Based on Walter Tevis's novel The Man Who Fell to Earth, told the story of an alien who comes to save his dying planet, but loses his soul in the process. The project was first proposed in 1968 by producers who wanted a reflective film about isolation and capitalism. The idea was rejected as too dark, too political, and too sad. Years later, it finally emerged as a British-American co-production starring Bowie, whose alien fragility perfectly captured the spirit of the 60s disillusionment. The film tells of Thomas Newton, a being who lands on Earth seeking water to save his homeworld. Using his advanced knowledge, he builds a vast corporate empire to fund his mission, but human greed, addiction, and government surveillance destroy him. He is left stranded, powerless, and forgotten. The production was cursed from the start. Scripts changed weekly, and scenes of corporate corruption drew attention from real government agencies concerned about subtext. Several countries delayed release, citing moral panic. Even after its 1976 debut, audiences were split. Some hailed it as genius, others walked out confused. But at its core, this film carried the 60s heartbeat, the idea that idealism could not survive modern capitalism. It became a mirror of the decade's lost dreams. Bowie's performance remains one of cinema's most haunting reminders that alienation is the true condition of man. Number 1. 2001. A Space Odyssey, 1968. No list of overlooked 60s science fiction would be complete without the film that redefined the genre yet confounded nearly everyone on its release. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey was not merely a film, it was an evolution of consciousness projected on screen. When it premiered, audiences were baffled. Some walked out. Others declared it a masterpiece. There were no explanations, only silence and images of cosmic transcendence. It broke every rule of storytelling. The first 20 minutes contained no dialogue. The ending defied interpretation. For a decade obsessed with clarity, this was chaos wrapped in beauty. Kubrick's obsession with realism pushed the production beyond reason. Sets were built with NASA-level precision. Actors performed inside rotating centrifuges that caused nausea and vertigo. The special effects team created techniques never used before, including slit-scan photography for the iconic Stargate sequence. Kubrick demanded perfection down to the smallest bolt. The film faced backlash from critics who called it pretentious and incomprehensible. Religious leaders condemned it as atheistic. Yet, underground screenings transformed it into a cult phenomenon. College students watched it repeatedly, believing it to be a cinematic drug trip. Decades later, 2001 stands as both the death and rebirth of science fiction. It ended the era of pulp rockets and ray guns, replacing them with mystery, awe, and terror. Its influence touched everything from Star Wars to Interstellar. Its final message remains timeless. Humanity may conquer technology, but only by surrendering to something greater, our own cosmic uncertainty. 15 forgotten visions from the 60s, each one daring strange and decades ahead of its time. They warned us of our arrogance and showed us the beauty hidden in fear. Which of these lost sci-fi treasures have you seen or now want to? Like, subscribe, and share which one you think the world should rediscover next.